welcome, welcome, welcome to Pathway.
Well, good morning, Pathway. Man, y'all came ready for church today. Man, that's good. That was powerful. That's what it's all about. So, man, thank you so much for being here. We're going to continue that atmosphere of worship the rest of our time together. If you're new, thank you so much for being here. My name is Brian. I'm the pastor. And at Pathway, we simply want to help you to know God, to find family, and to make a difference. That's what we're all about as a church. And, man, thanks for coming. I have a couple things I want to tell you real quick. I really never do, like, announcements for the message because we just want to get right into it. Just very quickly, you have this card in your seat. And here's my homework assignment for you. Go give it to someone this week and bring them. Don't just invite them. Bring them next week for Easter, because a statistic a few years ago showed that 80% of people would go to church if they were invited. And so who are you going to invite and bring with you next Sunday for Easter? And so I encourage you, please, we didn't give you 5, because you may not know 5 people, but I guarantee you know at least one person. So give it to them, bring them, because they're probably already thinking, honestly, they're probably thinking like, oh, it's Easter next week. We should probably go to church somewhere. But there's so many, I don't know which one to choose from. And you know, I don't know. And what if it's weird and they bring out snakes and they march around the weird stuff. You be like, hey, come to my church. It's not weird at all. We're scared of snakes at my church. So you just bring them, okay? But I encourage you, please bring them. It'll be great. And then another special request just for you, 10 o'clock, because you guys are awesome. You packed the place out. And so would you please consider, I'm just asking one time, would you consider next week coming to either the 8:30 or 11:30? Not all of you, because then it'll be empty in here. But some of you, all right? You know, the 8:30 or 11:30, because there's plenty of room really in the 8:30. But we encourage to make more room for more people, because most people are going to be just like you. They're going to get up, have a little breakfast, go to church, and do that. So, man, please consider coming to one of those, especially if you have kids. They are busting at the seams at the 10 o'clock. There's over like 40 kids back there, and so we encourage to do that for them. And then another thing that I'm really excited about, we've been working on for a while, and some of you may have noticed this, but on the back 2 walls, where we're calling them prayer walls, and we're calling that for 2 reasons. 1, it's a wall, and 2, we want you to pray. And so we're real creative, all right? So here's what we encourage you to do, that during our after the message, we do this pretty much every Sunday. After the message, we go back into a worship song again. And the reason is so that as you've heard God's word, we want you to respond somehow. However God is prompting you to respond. And our prayer team is usually at the front. You can come pray with them, or you can pray at your seat, or just worship. But we're creating this element for you that you can go back to those walls, and there's pins, there's these cards say prayer and praise on them, and then there's push pins, and you can write out the prayer that you have and put it to that wall. You can see people have already done it through first service, and push it on that wall, put it on that wall, and then you can just sit there and pray over it. Other people can pray over it. Maybe you don't have a prayer request, but you want to go near that wall and pray over somebody else's. And we're going to talk about this in a moment, but I would challenge you and encourage you to do this as well. Not just when you have a prayer request, because when God answers your prayer, write the praise on that and give God glory, because somebody else may be going through the same thing, and they're like, well, God answered their prayer, and so I believe God will answer my prayer, right? And so write that out as well. And then here's the last thing I challenge you to do. You can put your name on these. You can make them anonymous, either way. But when you put it on there, if you're putting a prayer request on the wall, you don't have to do this, but it's kind of like give a prayer, take a prayer. And so you're going to put a prayer on there, and then you see somebody else's prayer request, you take their prayer request, and then you pray over it all week long. I think a couple things are going to happen. It's going to help you pray. And I believe this, the more you pray for other people, all of a sudden you're going to see God do amazing things in your life, because it's not just about you, it's about helping pray for other people. So anyway, I encourage you to do that. We're really excited about that, and we'll do that here in just a little bit. But today we're concluding a series that we began the beginning of March called Ruth. And Ruth is a book in the Old Testament of the Bible. She's special for many reasons. One, there's 66 books in the Bible between New and Old Testament, and only 2 out of the 66 are exclusively titled after women. And if that's not enough, Ruth is the only non-Jewish book named after a non-Jewish person in the entire Old Testament of the Bible. And if that's not enough, she is the great-great-great-great-grandmother of King Jesus, who a week from today we're going to celebrate his resurrection. So it's incredible stuff. And if you're just joining us, Ruth begins in chapter 1. And the first sentence is there's a severe famine in the land of Israel, specifically Bethlehem where they live. And most likely, I mean, like 99.9% chance, the reason for the famine was because of their sin. Because God had told them earlier in the Old Testament Deuteronomy that if you don't call on me, if you worship other gods, I'm not going to give you rain because those gods can't do it. I can. And to get your attention, I'll hold the rain. And that's what happened. And so there's a guy named Elimelech and his two boys, Mahlon, Chilion, and his wife, Naomi. They're like, we've had enough. So they go about 75 miles east into the land of Moab, which is modern-day Jordan. They live there for 10 years. During those 10 years, the two boys, Mahlon, Chilion, get married. And what's really, again, if you're reading this through kind of Old Testament eyes, what's really shocking, like a major faux pas, they don't marry Jewish women. They marry Moabite women. And the Moabites were basically, to an extent, like the enemies of Israel. I mean, they just didn't like each other. The Israelites viewed the Moabites as just pagan, as second, third class people. And so the two boys marry Moabite women. So that's a big, like, you just don't do that. You don't do that. And then at the end of 10 years, all the men die. Mahlon, Chilion, and Elimelech, the husband, they all die. And so leaving Ruth, the mother-in-law, and now these two Moabite daughter-in-laws all alone. And Naomi's like, I'm going to go back home to my family in Bethlehem. And Orpha, one of the daughters-in-law, says, all right, see ya. I'm going to stay here. Ruth says, I'm going to go with you. And Naomi's like, no. And Ruth's like, no, you can't get me to leave. I'm staying here with you. Your God is now my God. In other words, she is literally turning her back on her family. She'll never see her family again. She'll never see her culture again, her native language, her customs again, holidays, none of that. And she is, we would say, converting to worshiping the God of the Bible, Yahweh. We just sang about it. And so it's not just a step that I'm going to be faithful to Naomi. It's a step of conversion, a faith step. And so it's a big step. And she basically pledges to serve Naomi the rest of her life. And basically, like, I'll be a widow the rest of my life. And that's how that goes. They get to Bethlehem. And the day they get to Bethlehem, all the other women in town, they come up to Naomi and say, oh, Naomi, we're glad to see you. And Naomi says, don't call me Naomi anymore. Naomi means pleasant. She says, call me Mara because I'm bitter, because God has made my life bitter. And I left full. I had my husband and my boys, and God has brought me back empty and brokenhearted. And God has his fist raised against me, she said. Now, that's going to come back to play today in a few moments. And so, but that's not true. She's got Ruth with her the whole time. And then, like, they're there and they're going to starve to it. They're two foreigner, or Ruth is a foreigner, and they're widows, and they're going to starve. So Ruth's like, I'll go out and I'll go get a job. I'll go work. And she gets the lowest, demeaning job out there, which is picking up leftover food, picking up leftover grain. But not quite like dumpster diving, but sort of, you get the idea. And it was a temp job. It wasn't even a permanent job with a salary, 401k, 2 weeks vacation, all right? It was none of that. It was just for the harvest season. And in chapter 2, it says that she had a strong work ethic and a woman of great character. In fact, it mentions her work over 10 different times in that chapter. So much so that the owner of the field where she's picking up the leftover grain, his name's Boaz. And Boaz notices her work ethic, and he notices she's pretty good looking too. And so he says, hey, why don't you stay and work for me full time for the rest of the harvest, which is about 2 to 3 months. And she does. And then chapter 3, at the end of the harvest season, Naomi, the mother-in-law, tells her daughter-in-law, Ruth, hey, you need to go down and propose to Boaz tonight at midnight. Get your wedding dress on, go down there and propose. And so it's like the weirdest proposal ever. And that's what she does. Ruth goes down, and in their custom, she proposes. And Boaz says, girl, you got it. Like, first thing, when the sun is up, I'll take care of it. I'm going to go get the ring at the jewelry, BK Clark, all right? Anniversary sale. Now you get the song in your head. But I'm going to buy you the ring, all right? I'm going to put a ring on it, okay? And so now the sun has come up. So this is just like maybe 4 hours from what we just read last week, chapter 3. The sun has come up. And now look at this in Ruth chapter 4, verse 1. Boaz went to the town gate and took a seat there. Just then, the family redeemer he had mentioned came by. So Boaz called out to him, "Come over here and sit down, friend. I want to talk to you." So they sat down together. Then Boaz called 10 leaders from the town and asked them to sit as witnesses. And Boaz said to the family redeemer, "You know Naomi, who came back from Moab? Well, she's selling the land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. I thought I should speak to you about it so that you can redeem it if you wish. If you want the land, then buy it here in the presence of these witnesses. But if you don't want it, let me know right away, because I'm next in line to redeem it after you." The man replied, "All right, I'll redeem it." Then Boaz told him, "Well, of course, your purchase of the land from Naomi also requires that you marry Ruth, the Moabite widow. That way she can have children who will carry on her husband's name and keep the land in the family." "Well, then I can't redeem it," the family redeemer replied, "because this might endanger my own estate. You redeem the land, I cannot do it." Now, in those days, it was custom in Israel for anyone transferring a right of purchase to remove his sandal and hand it to the other party. This publicly validated the transaction. So the other family redeemer drew off his sandal as he said to Boaz, "You buy the land." Then Boaz said to the elders and to the crowd standing around, "You are my witnesses today. I have bought from Naomi all the property of Elimelech, Chilion, and Mahlon, and with the land I have also acquired Ruth, the Moabite widow of Mahlon, to be my wife. This way she can have a son to carry on the family name of her dead husband and to inherit the family property here in his hometown. You are my witnesses today." As we continue on, I think one of the main big takeaways, big thoughts of chapter 1, or chapter 4, if I could summarize the whole chapter, one big takeaway for me at least, the main thought would be this, that restored by the Redeemer. And that's the big idea, I think, the main thing, if I could summarize it, of chapter 4, restored by the Redeemer. And as we're going to see at the end, everybody ends up getting restored by the Redeemer. So just quickly, because you're like, man, I don't know what it is with people in this culture and their feet, because last week Ruth uncovered the feet, and then now it's a sandal, and that's some weird stuff. And I would just say, what they're doing at the city gate, that was their court at that time. And so they're doing it, this legal transaction, they're bringing witnesses in, similar that we would do today, but we don't do it at a city gate because our cities don't have gates. They did it at the city gate. They're doing this transaction. We know from chapter 2 that Boaz was a city elder. He was a city leader. He was a mighty man of valor, the Bible said, very well respected. And he brings 10 other elders, or not just old, the elder doesn't mean old, it just means leaders in the community, to witness the transaction, the property transaction. And he says, hey, here's the idea, and it might sound weird to us, but I don't think it's really that weird. God established what they're doing in the Old Testament in Leviticus and Deuteronomy. But the concept was that you wanted to keep property in the family name. We do the same thing, right, for the most part. Well, their way of doing that was that, so for example, I'm the youngest of 5, so I'm the baby, all right? So I get more love, okay? The youngest of 5. I have 3 older brothers and an older sister. So my 3 older brothers, if I was to die, my wife would marry one of my 3 older brothers for the purpose of keeping all of my property in my family, and that they would have a baby, and that baby would be as if it was my baby. And you're like, yeah, well, that's weird. Well, we do a lot of weird things too, okay? And so, but the idea of the family redeemer, think about this. The family redeemer was literally stepping in to give life where there used to be death. Because Mahlon, the husband, had died. And with it, all of his property, the continuation of his family name, all of it died with him and is buried in the desert in Moab. And so his whole legacy, his whole lineage, everything is dead. And so they need a family redeemer to come and step in and give life where there is death. And that's what this guy does, Boaz. And so when they have a child, it's not necessarily as if it was Boaz and Ruth's baby. It was as if it was Ruth and Mahlon's baby. That's kind of the concept. So they keep everything in the family name. The Redeemer restores death to life. Well, that's great. That's wonderful if we know that. But I think it's, why does that matter? Why is that such a big deal that the Redeemer restores? That's the theme of the chapter. But why does that teach us about God? Why does it matter? And I think it's this. Because the Redeemer turns pain into purpose. The Redeemer doesn't just restore. That's the big thing. But why it matters? Because he takes the pain and turns it into purpose. Look at verse 11. Then the elders and all the people standing in the gate replied, "We are witnesses. May the Lord make this woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, from whom all the nation of Israel descended. And may you prosper in Ephrath and be famous in Bethlehem. And may the Lord give you descendants by this young woman who will be like those of our ancestor Perez and the son of Tamar and Judah." Now think about this. Let's zoom out just quickly. They give a prayer of blessing. It's the elders, the 10 elders, and it says everybody else in town. So, I mean, and Bethlehem's not that big of a place at this point. A couple hundred people, maybe 400 at the most. And they all come out, and they're witnessing the transaction along with a wedding, as it were, and they are pronouncing their blessing on Boaz and on Ruth, and there's a 4-part blessing to that. We're going to look at it in a minute. But here's the interesting thing to me. If you go back to chapter 2, what is the first thing when we're introduced to Boaz? The first thing out of his mouth in the story, he's the owner of the field. He's wealthy. He's a man of valor. He's got a lot of money, got a lot of connection. He's a leader to the city. The first thing out of Boaz's mouth when he comes up to his employees harvesting the grain is not, "Guys, we're getting behind on the quota. Let's go. Come on, guys, hurry up. Hey, guys, you missed a spot over here." It's not putting them down. The first thing out of his mouth is to his employees, "May the Lord bless you." And the thing is, as we said, if you're in leadership at wherever you work, do you pronounce a blessing over those under you, over those that you are responsible for? I would say this, even in families, in homes. Do you pronounce a blessing over your spouse, over your kids, over your grandkids? The first word out of his mouth is a blessing, and now look, the entire city comes out to bless the one that gave the blessing a couple chapters ago. Which tells us this, as we said earlier with the prayer wall. When you will go around in your life, not praying, "Oh God, would you bless me? Open up windows of heaven, Lord, and just bless me." No. When you go around saying, "God, help me to be a window of blessing to somebody else. God, help me to, whether I've got a lot or a little is beside the point, help me to be that blessing for them." And when you'll do that, all of a sudden, one day you look up and everybody God has put in your life is showering you with blessing because it was never about you. It was always about the other person and being a blessing to them, and God will bless you in return. And then look at this 4-part. The first one they say, "May the Lord make the woman, Ruth, coming into your home like Rachel and Leah." Now we would read that and be like, "Well, that's really nice. I don't know who those women are." Well, they were literally the matriarchs of the 12 tribes of Israel. Out of all 12 tribes came these 2 women. They were, if there was a Mount Rushmore for them, they'd be the first 2. It'd be like Abraham, then these 2 women. Big deal. And so what they're saying, now again, think about this. Every time Ruth is mentioned in the whole book of Ruth, it's always with one moniker. Ruth, the Moabite. And what they're saying is, again, in their Jewish eyes, they're saying, hey, we want this Moabite, kind of like our enemy, this woman who is from the tribe of our enemy next door. We want God to bless her as if she was one of the founders of our own faith and race. Big statement. I mean, it's huge. That's the greatest compliment she could ever get. And then look at the next one. They say, "And to Boaz, may you prosper." Look, we don't believe in that you give to get and healthy, wealthy, and blessed. We certainly don't believe that. However, biblically, here, it is okay to say, "God, would you help me to prosper?" Now, here's the caveat. It's not, "God, help me to prosper so that we can go and have vacation on a nice yacht and we can go to Sandals for 2 weeks and we got the Bahama Mama shirts and we going on vacation and we're all the time." And I'm not saying that stuff's bad, but I'm saying if you pray a prayer of, "God, help me to prosper for me so that I can enjoy life, so that my life can be easier," He won't do it and you've missed it completely. But the point is, why could they say that about Boaz, and why did God answer that prayer about Boaz? Well, remember chapter 2. One of the things you see from the big picture of Boaz's character, it was never about him. The first thing you see about Boaz, he's a hard worker, and he is generous to the foreigner named Ruth, and he is generous to all the employees that he has. And he is generous that night. He gives her like enough food to survive for her family for like a month. And then last night, just in real time last night, he gave Ruth to give to Naomi, the widow, 6 scoops of barley, about 30 to 50 pounds. In other words, every blessing that Boaz had, Boaz is a man of abundance. Boaz is a man that has more than enough. But what does he do with the extra? What does he do with the more than enough? Does he say, I'm going to build bigger barns and it's all about me and I'm going to be big and I'm going to be famous? No. Boaz says, I don't need all this, so I will give it to the poor. I'll give it to the marginalized. I'll give it to the foreigner. I'll give it to the outcast. I'll give it to the one that nobody notices. Listen, it is okay to say, God, would you prosper me so that I don't keep it? Goodness, no, I don't need all that. Would you prosper me so that I can help prosper other people, so that I can be a blessing to the poor and the marginalized and the foreigner and help lift them up? And the city prays this blessing on him, and God answers it. Here's the third one. The elders pray, may you be famous in Israel. And they're going to say that again in a few moments. Again, we're not saying you need to go around, God, would you make me famous? Because, no. Like, that's not. But the idea isn't, it gets kind of weird in English, but the idea is that God, with what you're doing now, think about what they're doing. The wealthiest guy in Bethlehem is marrying the most marginalized, poor, outcast woman in the whole area, Ruth. She's a foreigner, she's a widow, and the wealthiest guy. Last week, I had the honor of being part of our empty nester small group, and they are awesome. Y'all people awesome. I love you. That's a great small group to join, by the way. And somebody in that small group, we were talking about this, they said, this is like the ultimate Cinderella story. And I said, that's exactly right. I'm going to steal that next Sunday. But it's true. That's exactly what it is. And so he's elevating her. And so as a result of that, they say, would you be famous? They don't mean Boaz be famous because, honestly, he's not. Boaz has a couple of verses in Ruth, and he's only mentioned one more time in the Bible, and that is Matthew chapter 1 about the birth of Jesus. So Boaz isn't famous. What is famous? What God is doing in Boaz's and Ruth's life. It's okay to say, God, don't make me famous, but God, what you're doing in my life, would you use that, God, to make your name famous? God, my heartache, my pain, my ups and my downs, I don't care about me making fame. I'm nothing. But God, would you use it to make your name famous, that people would see you and call on you and that you change their life? That's the prayer. And then they say, may the Lord give you descendants. And certainly, as great as our founder Perez, they say, and their descendant is going to be greater than Perez, King Jesus. And even before you get to King Jesus, we're going to see in a moment their great-grandson, King David, is even greater than Perez. You're like, who's Perez? But you know David, right? And so this prayer, every one of these prayers gets answered. These blessings. It's amazing. So here's the point. When you begin to focus on being a blessing to other people, one day you'll look up and you are showered with blessing because it was never about you. It was about serving and being a blessing to other people like a Boaz. Now here's the thing. Let's just zoom out just for a moment. Take a quick pause. Zoom out. Look at the big picture of Ruth. 4 very short chapters. You could read it in about 15 minutes. Big picture. Think about this. This is so cool. How does it begin? I told you. Verse 1, chapter 1. There's a famine. Why is there a famine? Because the people sin. The famine makes the family move to a foreign place, and the boys, against conventional wisdom, marry these foreign women. Then the boys die, and one of the daughters-in-law stays, the other daughter-in-law goes. And then when they get there, Ruth, this other daughter-in-law, she's poor, and she's like, we got to get to work because we're going to die. We're going to starve to death. We got to get to work. And so she goes to work, and she just thinks she's randomly picking a field, but God is divinely orchestrating her steps to get to the field of Boaz. And God uses her work ethic to get the attention of Boaz, the owner. And Boaz is like, not only are you a hard worker, you're easy on the eyes too, girl. All right. And God says, I gotta get Boaz and I gotta get Ruth together. But Ruth is over here in Moab. And how can I get Ruth and Boaz together? Because I need both of them, because I want my son to be born with this great family lineage, King Jesus. I gotta get them connected. And so what God does is he says, here's what I'll do. The people are sinning. That's not good. And I'm using a famine. but I'll use the pain of the famine to drive the family to a foreign place. And against conventional wisdom, they're going to marry foreign women. And then I'm going to get Ruth to come back to Israel, and she's going to have to work because she's starving, she's marginalized, she's a foreigner. She's going to have to work. And so I'm going to make her work in the perfect field I want, the field of Boaz. And because of her work ethic, they're going to catch eyes, and they're going to get married, and my son will be born through that. Here's the point. What began as a tragedy in chapter 1, verse 1, now is a blessing at chapter 4. Listen, when you are in a famine, don't quit, because if God is writing your story, what is a famine today can be favor tomorrow. It may take 10 years, but God is orchestrating your steps. And so whether it's a big step of faith, a little step of faith, when you're just faithful day in and day out over this 10-year period, that God used the pain that they were going in and turned it into his purpose. Don't blame the famine. Don't give up on the famine, because favor is coming. God can use the tragedy in your life for his purpose if you'll let him. And here's, I think, the thing what we need to do about it, the big takeaway, and that is allow the Redeemer to restore your story. Allow the Redeemer to restore your story. Look at verse 13. So Boaz took Ruth into his home, and she became his wife. When he slept with her, the Lord enabled her to become pregnant, and she gave birth to a son. Then the women of the town said to Naomi, "Praise the Lord, who has now provided a Redeemer for your family. And may this child be famous in Israel. May he restore your youth and care for you in your old age. For he is the son of your daughter-in-law, who loves you and has been better to you than 7 sons." Naomi took the baby and cuddled him to her breast, and she cared for him as if he were her own. The neighbor women said, "Now at last Naomi has a son again." And they named him Obed. He became the father of Jesse and the grandfather of David. Now here's the amazing thing. Think about this if you're Ruth. Ruth, over this about 11-year period now, right? They come back. She works in the fields for 2-3 months. And then her and Boaz, they get married. And I'm thinking by the text, pretty quickly there, God enables her to have kids. So 9 months later, here pops the baby, right? And so about another year since they've been back. Think about this for Ruth. At any moment, she could have said no to God. Now, again, God never told Ruth, "Hey, this is what I'm doing in your life. Here's my master plan. And you got to." No. God never directly speaks to Ruth. Ruth could have said when her husband Mahlon died, she could have said, "Well, I'm just going to stay here in Moab." That's what Orpah did. "I'll just stay here. It's comfortable here. I know people here. I know the culture. I know the customs. I know the language. I'll just stay here." But instead, Ruth takes a massive leap of faith. Not only by moving and being a foreigner to a new country with new customs, with new people, and being really viewed as second or third class citizen, but in addition to that, she is converting, as it were, to worshiping Yahweh, the God of the Bible. Big step. And she could have said no to that, but she takes a giant leap of faith, not knowing how it'll end up when she goes to Israel. And then when she gets to Israel, she could have said, "Hey, well, one of us has got to work, Naomi, and I'm looking at you, girl. Like, I don't know anybody. I'm just going to stay here." She could have stayed there, but instead, Ruth goes to work. She could have said no to work, but she said yes to it. And then when Naomi says, "Hey, you need to go propose to Boaz," Ruth could have said, "No, but he's like 10, 15 years older than me. I don't know. Why would I go marry him? No, I'm not doing that." But God used her yes to fulfill his purpose. Just understand that whether it's a big leap of faith or small, daily, day in, day out at my job steps, whatever God is calling you to do, when you say yes to him, he will begin to restore the pain of your life into his purpose for you. Say yes to him when he's working in your life. And then you think of Naomi on the other end. Naomi, remember at the end of chapter 1, chapter 1 ends with Naomi saying, "Don't call me Naomi anymore," which means pleasant. "Call me Mara, because I'm bitter. God has abandoned me. I'm all alone. He's raised his fist against me." And remember, we said that wasn't true because Ruth was standing right there the whole time. And now, think about this. About a year ago when they got back, the same women that Naomi is saying, call me bitter. Those same women are now a year later calling her blessed. And not just blessed, they're saying that woman that you tried to get rid of a year ago, Ruth, is now the reason for your blessing. And what they're saying is that the woman Ruth is better to you than 7 sons. Now, we might read that and be like, oh, well, that's a nice statement. Again, it is a huge statement. In the Bible, 7 is the number of perfection. It's the number of completion. We don't need to add anything else to it. 7 is perfect. What they're saying figuratively, and I think even literally, is that, think about this again, this foreigner Moabite, like kind of like our enemy, this woman, widow, is better to you than 7 of our own Jewish sons. Perfect sons. Massive statement. Massive compliment. And notice, it's fascinating that this is how I picture it, that the baby is born, and like most of you nanas out there, my mom's called Nana to my kids, grandma's nanas, when the baby is born, you don't let mom hold the baby first. You nanas, you're in the delivery, and you snatch that baby up just like Naomi, and you cuddle him, and you snuggle him, and the nurses are prying him away. But that's what's going on. And they're saying, look, you have a son again. It's a complete reversal. A year ago, you were saying, it's all over. I'm all alone. My life is miserable. I'll just give up. I'm bitter. And now look at you, Naomi. You're blessed beyond measure. You got more than you could handle. God blessed you. You're married to Boaz, and you went from being poor to now you're the wealthiest woman in town. You went from having no children to now you've got a legacy. And in your legacy, David will kill Goliath and become the second king of Israel, the greatest king. And then generations later, King Jesus will come and save us all. You never know. What you call bitter today is a blessing tomorrow. You could be in a famine, but favor is coming. The 7 sons, I'm all alone, to now the very thing, think about this, that she tried to get rid of, Ruth, a year ago. She says, I'm all alone. I'm all by myself, which wasn't true. She's trying to almost get rid of Ruth again. And the very thing she was trying to get rid of, God used to save her. Be careful the relationship. I'm talking about Christian relationships, biblical, healthy, godly relationships, friendships in your life that you try to get rid of too soon. Because in your pain, you could say, I don't need anybody right now, and I'll just kind of withdraw. I'll just be on my own. Be careful, because it could be those relationships that are trying to love on you and you're trying to push away that could end up God using to save you a year later when you need Him. You know, it's amazing, when you think big picture, that Ruth saves Naomi. Naomi would have died if she would have went back to Israel on her own. She probably wouldn't have survived the 75-mile trip. She probably would have been, I'm sure, abused sexually. She probably would have been beaten and murdered and robbed and all this stuff. Probably wouldn't have made it back on her own. And even if she did, she would have died a poor widow. And we would never read about her. But God used this faithful foreign woman to save Naomi. And then God used Boaz to save Ruth, and then God uses their baby to save all of us. I mean, think about that. Today's Palm Sunday. A week from today, on Friday, we're doing a Good Friday service. Come here. I'm not sure what time. They'll tell you in a little bit. But come Good Friday. I think it's 7 o'clock. Come Good Friday. It's communion. It's worship. It'll be a great time. And so we're going to celebrate the death of Jesus. Next Sunday, we'll celebrate the resurrection of Jesus. Today, we celebrate Him entering into Jerusalem for the last time. And not to preach a whole other sermon, but that was the last time He entered Jerusalem. The next time, biblically, He'll enter Jerusalem will be when He takes us to be with Him forever. But that's a whole other sermon that we're looking forward to. But Jesus stepped into Jerusalem to save the people of that city and to save us all. And God used Boaz to step in, and the baby that Boaz and Ruth had, to save them and to save all of us. I mean, don't you see that when you give your life to Him, God redeems you, and He'll use your story to bring about His purpose? Be patient. It may be 10 years, maybe a year. As I said, Pathway will be 9 years old this September, so we're 8 and a half, somewhere in there. So we're like in second grade, I think, something like that, maybe third. And so But the amazing thing is a lot of you were there. I can't thank you enough for your faithfulness over the last 7 years because you heard a lot of bad sermons. I mean, just honestly, I went back and listened to some of it. It's an amazing. But anyway, I thank you for all the stuff that we did. But here's the thing. Our first Sunday, we had about 275 people, give or take, somewhere in there. We never saw 275 people again on a Sunday morning until about a year and a half ago. 7 years later. And yet through it, we're just faithful. We're unloading a trailer. We're setting stuff up in church for a high school, a movie theater, a park. We're just being faithful. Our attendance on that first day was great, and it went downhill fast ever since. Until about a year and a half ago, we hit that. It's not about numbers. I honestly don't check them. It's not that big a deal. It's just to say, be faithful, because God can use your pain and redeem you and turn it into his purpose if you'll let him and be faithful. Boaz brings this poor, familyless widow of Ruth into his wealthy family. And now Ruth goes from being a woman that has nothing, no name as it were, to now her great-great-grandson is the name above all names, Jesus. God takes Boaz and Ruth has nothing and no one to claim her own. And now, after they get married, now she is, now all that land that Boaz had, this is so cool, the very land that she was working in the harvest fields about 3 months ago, now she's the co-owner of that harvest field. Here's the cool thing. The New Testament says that when you give your life to Jesus, we are now joint co-heirs with Christ. Don't you see, the story of Boaz and Ruth is our story. I am Ruth. You are Ruth. We are poor. We have nothing to offer. And we have to have a Redeemer step in to save us from ourselves, to save us from sin, to save us from hell. And he doesn't just save us from sin, but he makes us the co-heir with him. Brings us from being no home and no family to now we're part of the family of God. In fact, to Jewish eyes who would be reading this, they would have probably read chapter 4 and say, probably the main idea is that you're saying that God will take foreigners or non-Jews and welcome them into his family. And the answer is yes, but. Because the story isn't, and Ruth was part of the community and everybody would live happily ever after. That's not how it goes. Ruth was only allowed fully into their family because of a Redeemer stepped in. Don't you see, that's your life. That when Jesus steps in to redeem you, he makes you part of his family. Just like Ruth and Boaz. Maybe you feel similar to Ruth, unwanted and unloved. You need a Redeemer to step in and restore you. You feel marginalized, you feel neglected, you feel like nobody sees you, nobody knows you. Just like a Ruth. Today, the Redeemer wants to step in and turn your pain into his purpose. I want to give you that chance right now. Let's pray. Father, we thank you so much.